There we go. All right. Happy Monday, everyone. It's April 1st, and this is a joint team meeting of the OpenJS Foundation Bootstrap meeting. We're joined with a number of folks from the former node.js Foundation and the former JS Foundation to discuss issues pertaining to getting our CPC and other administrative things up in order. We will move right on into our first agenda item, which is the infrastructure issue number 134. Brian Warner raised this to discuss mailing lists specifically. Brian, if you're on the call today, do you want to introduce the topic?
Yeah, definitely. So with the new organization, the new domains, we have new infrastructure. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask before I get too far down the line of, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. One of the questions I wanted to ask before I get too far down the line here is that, what sorts of lists do we need? Is there any other infrastructure that we need? Because once things get named, it's very difficult to change those names later. So, I'm assuming that, much as we were thinking about the name for this being, OpenJS Foundation being a very top level thing, but the projects retain their specific identities. My assumption is the same thing would be true for mailing lists and for project specific infrastructure. It's just that there may be some things that we want that are, at the cross project level. So I guess with that, I will throw this open and ask who would like me to create what, and do we have anything that we want to very specifically not create that should remain in the domains of the projects?
So I'd like to say we should definitely have a CPC email address.
Yep.
I think that was generally very successful for Node. I don't know if there's going to be, so if we do implement an org-wide code of conduct, that there also needs to be a report at the top level. Before we do that though, I do want to make sure Node has its own reporting mechanism with its own moderation team. I don't know how that will affect that, so we do need to think that through. Additionally, I think there are probably other things as well.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask about for CPC, Miles and I had been chatting about this last week a little bit. And I mean, the goal is not to replace doing things, on GitHub in the public or anything like that. One of the challenges with mailing lists is, you do have archives, but they're inherently less searchable than GitHub issues and things like that. However, at the same time, there may be situations where we do need private sessions for one thing or another. If it's discussing something that is unannounced, or moderation is a great example. If that does end up being in the realm of, at the top level project realm, for the CPC list, is this something that we would want to have wide open, or is it something that we'd want to have as a channel for internal discussion for any sorts of things that may be sensitive? Do we have a feeling about this? Which direction we want to go?
So this is something I think, at least for myself, I'd like to see us borrow from how Node has approached it, in which, we have a TSC and a ComCom list. I can't speak to how the ComCom list has been used, but at least over on the steering committee, we tend to use the list very sparingly and primarily only for extremely sensitive and private conversations.
I can echo that for ComCom as well.
And I would like to see that pattern continued. So to the thing that you were asking about discoverability and searching, I think that it's important to have a list when we need to be able to discuss things that are sensitive or private. But the majority of the conversation should be happening transparently and publicly, and using the general tools that we're used to using. Those tools being GitHub, to be very explicit.
One of the things that I can do when I name things to reinforce the idea that this is internal only, and essentially that it is meant to be the exception. would be to name things, for example, CPC-internal, so that there's never really any question whether this is an internal list or if it's not. Does anybody have any objection to that, to me using that scheme for lists where the archives are not public?
So I would suggest private, not internal, because it's internal to me specifies an organization, which is, this is a little more nebulous.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
We also have done this with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, where we have a steering committee public and, or sorry, a steering, no, crap, so many names. TOC public and a TOC private, and anyone can subscribe to the public to listen to any discussions. Now we do less on the on GitHub that way than happens in Node or in JavaScript or in other potential JavaScript projects. So my suspicion is that just having a private one would be fine if everything else happens on the public.
One of the things that is currently possible with the Node setup is for people outside of the TSC or ComCom to mail in at that email address. So essentially, if you want to contact the TSC privately or the ComCom privately, you can just send an email to tsc@iojs.org and you get it.
You got it. I can set it up that way if that's the way we want it. Certainly makes sense for moderation lists. We can do that for the CPC as well.
So one thing that I think is worth considering here also, the CPC is going to have a couple different kinds of membership.
Yep.
And so who gets to be on that list is going to be an interesting question.
Well, I was thinking you might need one which is like if the, I guess it depends whether we think, say, the voting members are going to need to have conversations which can't be public to all of the CPC members or not.
That functionally is the difference that we have in the CNCF between the TOC public mailing list, which has absolutely anyone from the community who wants to participate, and then the private mailing list, which is just the elected representatives.
So I think the point there, though, for us is that we want to avoid mailing lists for public conversations that can be GitHub, right? I think we've gotten, because we used to have, we actually don't know if it's been shut down. We used to have a mailing list and had one for quite some time in Node. And that was public, but it wasn't really conducive to, and then it also has to be moderated. So, yeah, that's another thing. So I would say for people to be able to mail to it if they have a private conversation, but even from time to time with ComCom in our private emails, we would have to push a conversation back out to the public just to say oh, this isn't actually something that we need to be talking about in private. Let's just take it to GitHub.
So that would suggest that the private mailing list would just be elected members, but not, well, I guess it's a whole long conversation to be had, so I will let you all have that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking when y'all are talking about, who would be on the mailing list. For the CPC private email, I would imagine that would be voting members, because otherwise, what needs to be talked about in private?
Exactly. I have to agree. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that would be a good starting point, and then it's not like we can't adjust if there's some reason, but it seems like starting with something that's more restrictive is the better way to go.
So the only thing about not having a public mailing list is there are people in companies who aren't allowed to post things to GitHub, and if you want to have their ability to get some sort of comment or feedback in, having a mailing list is possible.
I'll add that I think that the JS Foundation projects have enjoyed just getting a weekly recap type email, which is more of a community management thing, so they don't have to necessarily dig into the issues to just get a high level picture of what's going on.
So Jory, with regards to that, I'd be happy to set up a list that we can use for that sort of information.
Yeah.
We have an announced list, which is where I've been directing people who are interested in the individual membership program, and that's where we're currently collecting, generically collecting emails on the landing page right now. But I can put this down on my list. I'll connect with you afterwards for the specific parameters of that. But that definitely makes sense to get that list going.
Okay.
I mean, having said that, we do limit use of email for discussions, in the TSC and ComCom, but there are a whole bunch of mailing lists in the, like we have a repo where we can manage those, and they're used for when we register for build registrations and getting notifications from the MITRE with regard to CVE. So there's a bunch of times we do need emails. My question was going to be, is this something that we can, or at least have some mechanism so that we can set up some without having to go back to the foundation, or at least make that quite easy to set those up and manage the members?
I'm to be honest, I'm not really sure on how that all works. I know I've got access to the groups.io instance, but at the same time, I guess I'm happy to set these up and configure it. It's kind of my part of my job here. So,
Okay, because like the other ones we manage all through GitHub, right? So again, it's you can see who's in them. People can put PRs to get themselves in and out.
And Michael, for what it's worth, I think we could probably copy a lot of that infrastructure and just have Brian help set up the actual Gmail thing, because that side we don't set up from Node, as far as I know. That's actually it's an
right. There's some forwarders that say, okay, we're going to forward the node, node.js one to the one that's actually.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my experience is that the LFIT does manage the email side of things, because you can have a couple of people with super admin access, but I think part of that is that you have access to email addresses. And so there's just a level of privacy I think they try to protect, so that not everyone can do that. And that requires access to the Google suite.
So if I can provide a little bit of clarity here on how things are set up. We haven't set up G Suite for this domain. We are doing the mailing lists on the list.openjsf.org subdomain. That's being done through groups.io. And it is possible I can set up, I can configure groups, configure other people as admins, or whatever the term is, owner or moderator maybe, which gives them the ability to either add people directly to lists or to moderate requests to join lists and that sort of thing. It is really straightforward. As far as the top level email addresses go, so info at, membership at, that is managed by the LFIT team, and then they, basically have to configure who it forwards to. Does that help add a little context here in terms of how things are structured?
I think it makes it less clear as to how we would be able to facilitate this on the project side without having to bother y'all.
Well, basically, so I would set it up and configure it, hand over the keys to whoever is, moderating it or adding people or removing people or approving requests to join. And then it just basically works kind of the same way as what you're expecting.
Yeah, okay. The only difference might be that today it's actually you can go into GitHub and see what all the mailing lists are and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if there's APIs or something that we might be able to do where it's driven off those lists.
To be honest, I'm not sure. I guess the other thing that I'd point out is that the goal is not to replace any of the project specific stuff here.
Yep.
I would anticipate that if anything is going to get a lot of traffic, it would probably be the project lists. And this is really just for the top level openjsf.org type stuff. So hopefully there would be less, maybe a little bit less back and forth movement in terms of membership and moderation and things like that.
So yeah, I posted a question/comment on the Zoom chat about this. It seems to me like, if you're going to have 20 or 30 projects, you want those projects to be managing mailing lists if they want them. Now, I don't know what those names would be, whether those would be whether that would be something you would need to create for them and then hand them to manage or what. But I think the ones that currently are being created for OpenJSF would relate to foundation level things, not project level things.
That's correct. That's at least the scope of my question was for foundation level things. Dave, I do definitely recognize though that on the project side there are potentially quite a few other mailing lists that would be needed. So maybe this is something we can discuss next. This is.
On that note, I had thought this wouldn't take quite as long, and I want to make sure that we get to review time before Sarah Novotny has to jump off. So if you guys, I think this is a very valuable conversation to have, but if you all wouldn't mind us putting a pin on the conversation here, so we can just have that meeting time conversation really quick, so we don't with Sarah, and then we can pop back to it or a different agenda item if we want. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Thanks, Al. All right, Miles, you had proposed this issue around reviewing the meeting times. I think actually Michael opened it. Does one of you want to summarize really quick?
Yeah, I guess.
Go ahead.
Go for it, Michael.
I was going to say, it's a very short summary. We just thought we should revisit the current times, which are 9 and 2 on Monday, to make sure that they work for, for new participants.
Yeah, so I think perhaps there's kind of two directions we can go. We could make a doodle and try to have people fill it out. We could use the spreadsheet that the TSC uses, where people can put, all of their availabilities into it. And then I guess, another option is what we ended up doing the last time, which was I just kind of picked names out of a hat, and it seemed to work good enough. I think the latter is probably the least likely one for us to use again. But I know that there was a request for us to potentially revisit the times and potentially also consider a day other than Monday. Do people have a preference for the process?
Works fine for me, but I'm, New York City time, so I'm kind of in a good spot.
The spreadsheet seemed to work not too badly. I think it at least gives you a view of how hard it is to fit everything together.
I liked the spreadsheet. To be honest, I thought it was clever and a little bit cleaner than Doodle.
So I think the only thing we would need to fix with the spreadsheet would be that the spreadsheet is only for a single day. So perhaps we could do, I guess the challenge would be if we did a spreadsheet for every time of the entire week, it's going to get quite large.
True. That's a good point. So it sounds like Mondays are hard for people generally due to travel and it being the first day of the week. Mateo, I think which day would be better than Monday?
Oh, whatever. As I said, mine is a slight preference. My attendance has been, spotty a little bit because of this, but I am, I am okay in them being Mondays. It's just that, a lot of people, if you need to go somewhere for a conference or a client or anything, there's a lot of travel happening on Mondays, at least for me. So that's it really. While it's easy to find that time, if you're traveling at a conference or something, it's way harder. For me, Tuesdays will be way better. Wednesdays is the TSC stuff, so that might become a little bit more complicated, but that's fine as well. Thursday are okay. Typically the midweek days typically work best for this.
Sarah, before you drop, is there a day of the week that tends to work better for you?
My vote would be not Monday, 6 a.m. But beyond that, it's just going to be hit and miss, and I will have to move what I can around things. If something comes up against something that I can't move, I can mark those out in whatever the tool is that we use to define this. Thank you for accommodating this, and now I'm going to go get in an elevator.
Okay, thanks for joining, Sarah.
Yep, bye.
Bye. Okay, so maybe we could assume a midday week, Tuesday or Wednesday. That seems to be preferable to folks. And the spreadsheet, just do Tuesday and Wednesday options in the spreadsheet. Would that work?
We'd have to have two spreadsheets.
Or yeah, two sheets in one doc. I think that hopefully would be clear.
And try. That sounds good to me.
Cool. Any objections to that as a path forward? All right. Thanks everybody for letting me pop over to this issue really quick. Do we want to close the discussion on the mailing list and then go to another issue? Or Brian, that was your issue. I just want to make sure you have what you need to be unblocked.
I would just close with the request that anybody who would like to have a mailing list added, please just add another issue or comment on the issue that I opened. And that way we can just keep track of it. And that's a good way to do it asynchronously. And that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I guess I'd suggest we start with a smaller set and then grow as we need, as opposed to like start with a whole bunch with my only last comment.
I 100% agree with that. I'd rather start small and then add them as needed versus have to rename or retire later.
All right. I will move on then to issue number 132. This is a pull request that adds a project.md file. This is an action item from last meeting, and just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to see it and request any changes. If, for example, you want the your project website to go to a different URL, that kind of thing. I did see some comments from Rich, and just think this is more of a question, for the node project, which URL you'd like to send your people to from that file. But I think it was all pretty nominal.
I'm still trying to get some feedback from the Express project. I emailed Doug last week. I took a quick look through my email. I don't see an answer yet, but I'll try and see if I can get a more definitive answer on that this week.
Yeah, regarding Rich's question, I'd agree with him that node.js.org is the canonical URL to point people to rather than the dev tutorial site.
Yes.
Okay, I will commit that change. It's kind of last question before I would ask if it's okay to merge this in is for Express, my assumption was that it would be all right to list them as an at-large project since we really don't have a lot of feedback from that group yet. Do you all feel comfortable with that being their categorization for the time being?
I was wondering if we should maybe put it under a TBD to avoid any issue.
Okay.
I can reach out. We can reach out. I think Wes is on the package maintainers group.
Yeah, I was looking for an email for him. He's also, I think, on paternity leave, but
okay.
Yeah, we should try him as well again. And I did email Doug, but if anybody else you can think of, or if you have his direct email, then that would be good.
I also have some contacts with Doug Wilson, so I can probably reach out.
Yeah, if you could do that as well, like I'd sent him an email, but I think if we can get one of us to get in touch with him now.
It's very hard to get in touch with Doug Wilson.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so I can move Express to TBD for now. And other than that, any objections to merging that in?
No objections. I wonder, does it make sense to create an issue to the Express org asking them specifically, or is that going too far?
I think it's better to reach out to the people.
All right, fair enough.
Okay. The next topic is creating a process for new projects to join the foundation. This was a bit of an ad hoc conversation at the end of last meeting that Miles memorialized into this issue number 130. Miles, would you like to introduce this topic?
Yes, absolutely. I had originally talked about putting together a PR, but I have not had time, unfortunately. Last week was pretty busy. Basically, there's kind of two different things going on here. The first would be, as a whole, once the CPC is formed, we're going to want a pretty clear process for how projects can join the foundation, what that process looks like. On top of that, right now, as we're still in the Bootstrap phase and before the CPC is formed, there are still projects that may want to start participating. And some of those projects, may have individuals that aren't already involved in OpenJS projects. Although I do think that we'll see enough of an overlap that most projects, hopefully, that want to join should have some sort of overlap and, based on our current bylaws, be able to come and participate. The idea of what we were talking about putting together was some sort of way, perhaps a new class of project, for projects to identify that they indeed want to join, and then kind of giving them, through the bylaws, an ability to participate in kind of like a non-consensus seeking capacity. So I know we already are using the term observer within the CPC, but it would be kind of similar to what you could consider an observer status if they didn't participate in consensus seeking. Now, one other thing that I've kind of been thinking through is when I've been thinking about drafting this has been, what could the process look like for new projects joining? And one of the things in particular that I think we need to kind of work through is what it looks like to object to a project joining the foundation. And so I know I don't have any drafted governance around this, but the one thing that I was thinking about, and this could be, kind of looking back at that conversation that we were having before about mailing lists. I was kind of thinking about what a first need or a first thing would be. And so if a project is interested in joining, I was kind of thinking the parallel between how we nominate candidates to be collaborators in Node, that if someone has an overarching large objection to a project joining, I think it might be better if before the project has publicly made a claim that they're going to join, that there's a way that we can kind of kindly let them know if there's objections in advance. And then later on, if there's more specific objections, ones that can actually be worked through, that those could happen through the public process. So the process that I'm imagining is something along the lines where a project can reach out either to CPC members or to OpenJS staff to express interest in joining, and then through a private list, which would probably have to be wider than just the voting members, we can have an opportunity for people to object wholesale to a project joining. And, similar to the rules in which Node.js itself works, I think it may need a little bit more of an objection than just, I say no. But it would be good to kind of work through any of those high-level, non-specific objections before the project even gets involved. And then once that process has kind of passed, objections in the future should very much be focused, like they need a code of conduct, or they need to have a more open governance, or, I'm just kind of spitballing. But the general idea would be, once a project kind of joins in whatever this stage capacity is, intent to join, or whatever kind of stage it is, that they're more or less guaranteed that if they get through the main process things, then no one at the last minute is going to show up and say, hey, I just don't think this project should be in our foundation. So anyways, that's a brain dump of kind of where I'm at on it right now. And I'd be interested in some feedback, but I do realize that it's a little harder to give feedback without this kind of drafted and written down.
So tactically, it sounds like, a next step is actually drafting some proposal to discuss. But absent that, I think on a just more general level, getting everybody's responses to this as an idea is helpful as a first start. Is that right, Miles?
Yeah, that's correct.
I can give you a little bit of background from the JSF process, which was originally that we would just have people file a pull request, but we ran into this very same problem of, there is a bit of a, embarrassment for a project, for example, that might not be admitted, not because they're a bad project, but because at least for our admission criteria for the JSF, we didn't really feel that it met them. So we had a public application for a project that was run by a single maintainer for years, that was a jQuery upload plugin. And it just didn't seem like it, like essentially the maintainer was looking for a way out. And that didn't seem like the right fit, for them to kind of drop it on our doorstep and then walk away. So I think it does help to do some type of private thing. We can, most every other project has contacted us privately, and then we discuss with them what they would need to do, and then they would make their application.
I'd also like to echo that. There's a specific linting project that I can think of in our ecosystem that is maintained by a company that has questionable motivations, I guess. And I can see myself and others objecting to bringing such a project in on, an ethical basis. So, I'd also like to see this from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, I can imagine having, a form on the site or something where people could, a project could register their interest or intent, and then maybe we could discuss it in like the private session of a CPC meeting or something along those lines before opening it up to the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree that having some initial discussion makes sense. I think we have to be a bit careful in terms of expectations. I don't think we should be promising that if you get through the private discussion, it's a done deal, right? Like it's still that, it's done. We do these things in public because you get broader input. And so it's still got to be that, yes, we try and make sure that it's most likely going to be okay and people aren't going to object, but it doesn't mean that somebody won't at some point.
I think the biggest difference that I was trying to distinguish between was wholesale objection versus specific objection. Mm-hmm. So it's the difference between things a project can fix and things a project can't fix. So I would imagine in this first round, if someone is just like, this project is not appropriate for our foundation, that's not something that can ever be reconciled. That's very different than the project needs to implement a DCO, or the project needs to have more maintainers that aren't just from one company. You know, like there's a difference between things that are actionable and fixable and things that are reconcilable. And
yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I still caution that, you know, it'll be interesting to see what you put into what you suggest in terms of the write-up.
Yeah, I think it also goes to show that this will be really important in setting criteria. And it's not just technical, it's also values, right? So we don't want specific people to come in during the public process and say, like, this isn't what we are, this isn't what these projects are, this isn't like the kind of company that we would, you know, like that sort of thing. That should be handled. That discussion can happen before it goes out into the public sphere. Because again, like, I do think like the idea of the reconcilable things, right? It's not even, it's sort of like, this is what the ethos of this, you know, project is, and that isn't a good fit for what this is. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing necessarily. It's just not right for this. So yeah, I mean, I think the guidelines, the criteria will be very helpful with that. But yeah, I mean, Michael, I think that's a good point, that it's not going to be, I mean, at that point, we just have to be careful because we're trying to be respectful of other projects in the ecosystem that may or may not join. And it's about, you know, goodwill, right? We don't want to be jerks in public, and then that certainly doesn't help us with other projects that would potentially want to join, or projects that are already a part of our organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm like, it's very good to try and make sure that there's a good match beforehand. But if somebody, you know, for example, if somebody comes up and points something out along the way after it's gone public, that means that, oh, wait a second, you know, we didn't realize that. You know, I don't think it, I think it's, you can't basically handcuff the CPC to say, well, by the time that's been publicly applied, you can't say no, right?
Yeah, at the same time, I think there should definitely be some well-defined criteria that an applicant could know about to say, okay, you know, we meet all these. It doesn't mean that just because we meet all these that we'll be admitted, but we know we need a code of conduct or yes, other things before we can proceed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Those, I mean, those are the easy things, right? Those are like, these are the things you need to have. You check them off, but and doing the matchmaking beforehand is absolutely makes sense. I'm just saying, it, you know, what does it mean if it's just a technical process after the application, right? I think it.
So I don't think it's purely a technical process, but I think the main idea here is, you know, it's also not very fair to a project if they go through a process for a month and a half or 2 months and someone who wasn't involved at all during that process shows up and completely derails the whole thing in the last minute. Like, yeah,
no, I mean, I'm definitely agreeing with that. And I think that would actually take convincing the voting members, right?
Right. I would imagine that would look something like, it's not saying that the CPC like whole hog vouches for everything, that the project that has publicly applied for a thing, you know, they've gone through everything. But I think to show the criteria that the CPC considered in discussion before, you know, in preparation for the public application could help, right? It's sort of like the template for, you know, when that public application happens, that these things have been considered. These are, you know, even the, like what you said, like, you know, these are the things that we are doing as part of our public application, like adding a code of conduct and working with this group in order to make sure that it fits, you know.
So I summarize this as meeting some kind of mutual fitness criteria that CPC voting members agree to before the application becomes public knowledge. Is that an accurate summary?
I'm not 100% sure that that's exactly what I had in mind. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as much that, like in the private bit in advance that you needed to figure out everything that needed to be done. Like, I guess the real soul of what I was trying to say was, if people were going to wholesale object, independent of any specific things, we should know that in advance before we set people up for failure publicly.
Yeah.
Right, but that would only happen. I mean, it's really tough to get all the feedback that you need before it's a public application, right? That's, I think, to Michael's point, is that it's not derailing if you come in because you weren't a part of the private conversation.
Yes.
And you have legitimate concerns, but then other folks who have been a part of this process can say, oh, either, yeah, we actually, that wasn't brought to light in our conversation so far, or, yeah, we've already discussed this, like, let's talk to you about how we interpreted this and how the project is handling this, that sort of thing. Like, it's a little bit of CPC being able to say, like, yeah, we didn't, rubber stamp this, but, here's how we thought about this when we talked to them because this was brought up.
But if this group that we're talking about, the CPC and this mailing list that I'm imagining is wide enough that it's anyone who's opted in from any project and anyone who could participate in the consensus process. I'm not saying it would be only the voting members who would be part of this early private process. This would be like, it could be as simple as like a mailing list that goes to every single member of every single project that says this project is thinking about joining. Does anyone object to it? And if so, please raise your concerns. I think like an example of something that could happen there would be a project applies and it's written in Python. And we're like, this doesn't make sense for our foundation. Like that's the extent of objections and the broadness that I'm thinking about. And there's not to say that, Michael, to your point, that things may not be discovered as we go about in good faith. It's far more about, just making sure that I think I made that point already. So
yeah, I think we're kind of on the same wavelength. It's just a matter of like an initial filter makes 100% sense in my mind. It's just we need to manage the expectations, I think, a little bit in terms of, you get through that filter, that means that hopefully nobody's just going to say, no, I just don't think it's a great fit. But
it's like a phone screen for an interview.
Yeah, I mean, when you get into more details, who knows what's going to come up, and those can still affect the actual decision, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes to the top of the hour, and I do want to make sure we get to the last two topics, at least in brief. I think they're very, very related. They can almost be treated as one. And this is that project housekeeping, as well as the steps to bootstrap the CPC and new foundation. I'm going to suggest we start with Michael's issue number 115 as a first, because I think that's probably a bit more pertinent.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've got the list that we're sort of working through in terms of the things that are there. The one we were working on, which was confirming the list of initial impact projects, which Jory opened the issue for, we've discussed, so that should land. We still do need to close with Express, but otherwise that looks good. Next was landing the common code of conduct in the OpenJS org. I had that action, but I'll get to that this week. The next one was a new Zoom, YouTube, etc. I think, Brian, you were looking at that.
Sorry, I was on mute. So yeah, I'm sorry. Again, I don't have anything to report on this one. I promise I'll get to this week.
Okay, sounds good. Then target initial meeting, which I think we've set for the Collaborator Summit, and then the checklist of projects, which is the other issue that Jory mentioned that we'll go through. Are there any other things that people think we should add to that list in terms of sort of next steps in getting things bootstrapped? I wonder if do we need any feedback? I assume so. Jory, have you gone back to? I think you already took the action to go back and talk to the JSF projects about figuring out who their representatives might be.
Yes, and other than a couple of projects saying that they were, talking about it, I don't actually have any conclusion. So this week I'm really going to annoy people to make that selection something they can change within their own project later if they choose, but we really need their input now. So, started with the gentle ask, gradually getting a little firmer, and then,
Okay. Yeah, I mean, on the node front, we've got the conversation going. It's still going to take, I think, a little while to play out in terms of, how we want to identify people. I think so. We just need to make sure that's moving forward, as opposed to, we don't need an answer in a week or two.
When would we like to have an answer? Because I think that would be really helpful if I could say, this is the deadline. You must tell me by this day. I think that would be helpful.
I think we wanted to have the CPC formed by the Collaborator Summit. So I think, a week before the Collaborator Summit is a decent deadline for the names if no one disagrees. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there's kind of a secondary thing here, which is I would personally like to see people from those projects participating far in advance of that.
I wholly agree.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of our drop dead date, but it would be good to have an earlier date or people involved earlier.
Yeah, because I would say I would hope that the CPC those ending up on the CPC would have time to meet together at Collab Summit and do some planning before then. So, I mean, I just like working backwards from there. I don't know. I would say more of a month than a week. I don't know. I know we're coming up on, time ticking away on that, but
I think that it's really generous, especially for some of the projects. I don't see why they couldn't have this decided by then.
So, I mean, yeah, and I guess I just to encourage, like, Jory, if you could encourage individuals from those projects to kind of participate in these meetings.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that we need to have their CPC reps figured out, and since we are designing a whole bunch of process that those members will be responsible for, I think it would be prudent for them to kind of give their blessing over it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even then, that still gives them a month, right? Like we have the entire month of April, and arguably Jory has already been trying to get them to consider it.
I mean, they know that they want to do it. It's just a matter of like the forcing function, they know they need to do selection, and now there's needs to be a forcing function of the deadline, and and then it's also getting them just generally more engaged in this particular meeting would be very helpful. But working on it.
So should we say like a May 1st deadline for like CPC, like proposed seats?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I know on the node side that might be a little, I think that's actually a tight schedule, but now that I've said that, I was like, oh, we have a lot of overhead. This is going to be interesting. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I think let's write that down as deadline May 1 ? And see if we can target that.
I mean, just to be pragmatic about it, if our gut reaction as Node, who's done this before and been actively involved in the meetings, is that May 1st may be tight. So we want to just say maybe the 15th, just to give a little more wiggle room and be fair.
I mean, I think it's the reason I said that was more of there are a lot of people who care, and I don't know if there is a big election process versus some of the other projects that may just be able to say like, oh, we'll nominate this person. We're all cool about this. I still think we could get it done in a month. But
yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't be bad to try and target that, and then if it's knowing that maybe it needs to be extended if it just doesn't quite happen.
Yeah.
I'm super happy to extend the deadline for Node, but not the other projects.
Okay, May 1st sounds good to me. I mean, I think Node already figured out more or less what the process should be. We just need to kick it off.
Mm.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at that issue, but if we've got agreement on that, then yeah, it's basically set up the the way we're going to vote. So.
All right. So the other issue that is related was the issue 121 on the checklist for new projects specifically. This has been open for about 14 days, and we've had a number of great contributions to what this list would be. There was an action item that doesn't look like it was completed, so I'll take it to do a proposal for this onboarding list. And so that's sort of a next step there. That's one next step there. And I think there's probably some further conversations that need to be had about specific language in disclaimers and that kind of thing. So we may actually need some support from the Linux Foundation legal to make sure that any legal disclaimers have been vetted and cleared, and that's what we're putting on project websites, etc.
Yep. It's a very minor nit, but that would be the OpenJS Foundation legal versus Linux Foundation legal.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Good point. All right. So any other further thoughts on issues, either issues 121 or 115? No. Okay. Groovy. Groove-tastic, as my daughter's toy says. It is 9:56. I'm happy to give folks 4 minutes back if there's nothing further we need to discuss today. Hearing nothing. We will see everybody for the next meeting on Monday, would that be the 7th, I believe, at the later time in the afternoon. Between now and then, we'll get this spreadsheet going around so we can start to collect alternative times and dates, and then hopefully make a selection in the next week or two for our new time. Next week, I believe Miles is traveling. Is that right?
It is correct, but I think on Monday I might be able to still make the meeting because I'm taking a red eye on Sunday.
Okay. And I will be away for the W3C meeting. So should we select another chairperson for next week now? Who would like to chair next week?
I'm happy to do it. Or if anybody else wants to do it, I'm also happy. So.
I just realized I am also on a flight, so I can't.
I'm also happy to help if that's needed.
Okay, let's. I think Michael, you had said also last week that you might be available, so we'll say Michael, and then maybe Tierney the week after, and we can just sort of rotate through. I think that's very
sure.
Helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, I also. Sorry, I was just going to say quickly, I have PRs up against our meeting creation tools to make them more generic so that we can use them for this meeting without requiring monkey patching.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for all of the node ones, I have the meetings being automatically generated. I was wondering if anybody has any objection to me setting that up for this one as well.
Not at all. Please do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe it may be harder than I think because of the repo issue, but I thought when I was testing it that it actually could point to different repos. So,
we can talk about it offline, but
sure.
The two PRs I have open make the tools work for this. It just adds a new argument.
Okay. It may be that I already. Anyway, I'll see what I can do with what I've got at the higher layer, and if it just works, then otherwise I'll figure out what you've done. Sounds good.
All right. How do we close the YouTube? Stop live stream.